Welcome to the other side of 40. My name is April Grant, and I'm here to help women make positive changes with their lives after the age of 40. Let the other side of 40 become your community to find inspiration and support to start the next chapter of your life. Welcome to this week's episode of The Other Side of 40. Today we have Shawna Gann, and she is a management consultant in the DC metro area. Though originally from Anchorage, Alaska, she has lived and worked all around the world, primarily teaching elementary school. In recent years, she shifted gears to focus on organizational development and other workplace matters. She is currently pursuing her Ph.D. in business psychology with a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, specifically for those perceived as racially ambiguous. This pursuit also inspired the creation of her weekly podcast, Our True Colors. Welcome, Shawna.
Thank you. Welcome. 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 I'm used to saying welcome.
As we see, you're also a
That's
podcast
funny. I am. Thank you for having me. Let me get in the correct seat. And
Okay.
now I'm ready.
All right. Well, what I thought was really interesting about your bio was the that you're focusing on diversity and equity, especially right now with everything going on in the world. We have a lot of injustice out there, and people are really taking to the streets, literally, for demanding justice. So we will get into that, but let's start. What is your awakening moment, and tell us about it?
Yes. Well, I am a military spouse. My husband's an active duty member of the Air Force, and for nearly 26 years, actually. And we met when both of us were really, really young. I was in university studying to be a teacher, and we got married and got on our way. So we met in Alaska, but as it typically goes with military life, we moved a lot, although probably less than some. So I feel fortunate that we did get to stick around some places a little bit longer. But with that meant uprooting, our family, our kids, but also I was uprooted from my job every single time.
Right.
So every new location meant establishing myself again, proving myself again. I mean, there was a lot of growth in that, and I've learned a lot because I've been with so many people and lived in so many places and have been around the local culture, but also the culture of every workplace.
Mm-hmm.
But I just felt so stagnant because I could never really get ahead because I had to start over every time. So even though I had personal growth and a little bit of professional growth, it wasn't really evident in my job because, I was always the new kid on the block.
Right.
So, when we got to Korea, because like I said, we lived a lot of places. I don't know if we'll talk about that at some point, but my last teaching position was when we lived in Seoul. And I was applying for a position that would have been sort of a step between. I'll wait a second. I don't know if you can hear the sirens, but I live by a fire station,
okay.
So
it's not loud.
I'm used. Oh, good. I'm used to chopping them out every time. So my bad.
Oh, okay.
So, right. So my last teaching position was in Seoul, South Korea, and I really was itching to move up somewhere. And the thing about teaching, I loved it. I love the kids. I mean, I loved being a teacher, but there's not a true career path. You either continue being a teacher and take on some additional duties, which I did a lot of.
Right.
So bookmark that because that has a lot to do with why I changed or why I made the change that I did. Or you move into administration, which I did not want to do.
Right.
And there are very few sort of in-betweens. And there was a position that would have allowed me to work with the school district, with teachers and with admin. It was a great sort of liaison position.
Mhm.
And when I lost out to it, to a long-term DODS teacher, I taught for the Department of Defense schools. I I realized, okay, I'm just not growing. And my husband would soon retire, and I hadn't had so he has had this wonderful, beautiful career, but my career was just so choppy. And
Right.
my resume is like 17 pages long because of all the jobs. I'm just kidding. But really,
Right,
you
right.
know,
Every 2 years you're changing, every 1 to 2 years you're changing jobs, so
yeah.
yeah.
Well, fortunately for us, it wasn't quite that often, but it was
Oh, that's
enough.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. So, right. I was mentioning that I did all these extra duty sort of things. I ran after school clubs for students. I was, um, and some of those clubs had to do with school improvement. So at one of the schools, I was the school improvement leadership chair. So it's like a continuous school improvement thing. It has to do with reaccreditation whenever schools need to show that they're progressing, et cetera.
Okay.
And so I chaired that. And then after that experience, you can never kind of take that out of your blood. So everywhere
Mhm.
I went, I was somehow involved with that. And then I decided I needed more education. So I went back and got my master's degree in curriculum instruction and assessment. And then came the Common Core standards, which kind of
Oh,
freaked everybody out, right?
yeah.
So Dodds did not follow Common Core, but there's a similar one that kind of mirrors that. So I went back and got a certificate in that. And all of these credits I was hoping would kind of push me along to the next level. And it just wasn't quite enough. And in speaking with a friend who actually she and I taught together when both of our children were in elementary school, like 10 years prior when we both worked in Italy. She just showed up on the base one day and said, Shawna Gann, oh my God. And we connected, and I kind
Right.
of told her about my life and what I'd been doing. And she said, have you ever considered doing organizational leadership? And I
Hmm.
hadn't. So I was like, I will look into this.
Right.
And I did. And I didn't want another master's. I didn't want another cert. So that was kind of it. I was looking at my husband about to retire after his wonderful career. I was not regretting our military experiences,
Of
not
course
even
not.
in the least, because I've learned so much, I've seen so much, but I couldn't stand the idea of not growing anymore.
It's time
So
for a new chapter. You needed to
it
really turn that
absolutely was.
page and start something new, and organizational leadership was it.
Well, I thought it was.
Oh, okay.
So I registered for classes, got started, and after my first term, if you've ever done, it was an online program. I'm still in online program. I started to see all these posts from people called IO psychologists, and I was like, "What the heck's an IO psychologist? I'd never heard of it before." So I looked it up, industrial and organizational psychology, and I read about it. And basically, it's problem solving, and you're consulting, and pardon me, working with clients on solutioning. And it could be anything from HR to uh, big group sort of organizational design. And I was like, oh my God, these are my people. So
Right.
I I switched, and I couldn't go into IO psychology specifically since my undergraduate work and my master's degree were in education, but I could do business psychology, which is a very, very similar. So
Right.
that is what got me to where I am now. And I haven't been in the classroom for 4 years. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
listen, I think I put my hands up to anyone who goes back to school. I did my straight 17 years of it, going straight through undergrad, college, and law school, and I was out. I was like, I can't do anymore. I see all sorts of good programs and interesting programs, but I just don't know if I can bring myself to go back into the classroom and have that focus and concentration. But that could also be because I have a 6 and 8 year old at home, and it just seems overwhelming to try to help educate them and educate myself, that and a 16-year-old too. So
Yeah.
we're about to send him off to college. So it just seems very overwhelming for me. I applaud any woman who can do that because there are
Mhm.
women who do it, and I applaud them, and much respect. That's all I have
Oh,
to say.
well,
Um,
thank I did split mine up. So mine was over time,
Yeah.
I think I got my master's in 2009. So some time has gone by, and my kids are big. I've got a 21-year-old and 18-year-old.
Okay.
So I have, um, I guess that at least
Yeah.
it's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, you wanted to start talking a little bit more about moving a lot. Did you want to speak more on that about the different locations you live in?
Sure. And that kind of ties into my interest in diversity and inclusion
Mhm.
as well. So, as you said, I am from Anchorage, Alaska. I mean, that's my home. I grew up there,
Yeah.
and it's one of the most diverse cities that I knew as, a young person. We did move temporarily to Pennsylvania, and that was a stark difference. So this is in my childhood. So when we went back to Anchorage, it was a breath of fresh air. I was so glad to be back. And one thing about me is that I'm perceived as racially ambiguous. People are always trying to guess, quote,
Mhm.
what I am, unquote.
Mhm.
Or I got are you mixed, or are you this? Or a lot of times people will assume that I'm just like Latina, which I'm not. um, and it's always been kind of it turns up in conversation at some point. It's something that I expect. It's really interesting because it also depends on kind of what my hairstyle is. Because I always
Yes.
say I have seasonal hair. So
Yes.
I do. So depending on that, that kind of drives the kind of assumptions or the questions. So when I met my husband, who is white, so we're also an interracial couple.
Okay.
Um, yeah, when we moved to the middle of America, we went to Scott Air Force Base, which is really right smack in the middle of soybeans and cornfields.
Oh,
And
wow.
aside from the military base, it's pretty homogenous. Like military communities tend to be pretty diverse. But yeah, it was that was an interesting experience because I taught at a school where the teachers, the staff weren't quite racially representative of the students that attended. And I remember I had a friend, Teresa. She was the only other Black teacher in the school, and her husband's
Mhm.
military too, and they were PCSing or moving to a new location. And I wanted to teach her grade level, so I put in for it and everything. At this point, I had already gotten, exceeds expectations on all of my evaluations, and I've done all the extra stuff you're supposed to do to kind of, get. As I told you, every place
Yeah.
I went, I was trying to prove myself, right? So
Right,
I'd done
right.
all the extras, gold stars, gold stars.
You quickly learned what that extra was, so people that put people on notice that you knew what you were doing.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
just like, I'm here, I'm Shawna, let's do this. Like I need
Yeah.
to move ahead. And but they pulled somebody else in. They hired someone from outside.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, I went to my we had a new principal that year, and I went to my superintendent because it's a fairly small district, and I asked her, you know, I said, I've done all of these things, and it appears according to my evaluations, I've exceeded expectations. I've got the experience. What could I have done to give me the leg up so that I would have gotten that position instead of missing? And she
Look at you
said,
taking that next step, asking that
hey,
hard question. It's a hard question to ask.
I'm famous for hard questions. But anyway, I challenge sometimes.
Yes.
So I asked her this, and she said, well, Shawna, as you know, we've been trying to really diversify the staff because of the student body and all of that. And I'm looking at her like, okay. And so I didn't mention they hired a man for this. So that's diversity.
Yes, especially in the
But
teaching field. Yeah.
yes, exactly. But I was still wondering, what I could have done, because they could have put him in my position and I could have moved to the one that
Right.
I wanted. So there was
Yes.
still some
Yes.
placement that could have happened there with the vacancy. And she said, well, how did it go? She said, we're trying to diversify. And I looked at her and I was like, Karen, like, how am I not the, a face of diversity?
Right.
And she's like, well, Shawna, we didn't know what you are. I was like,
Oh, they couldn't check the right box for you.
right. So I looked at her, I go, Karen, I'm black. And she goes, oh my God, go tell Peggy. Go tell Peggy. Who's the
Oh my
principal.
goodness.
Right. So I was like, yeah, I'm not running down the hall to go bang on the principal's door and go, Peggy, I'm black. Like, what is that? So that one experience kind of began to put me on the trajectory of diversity, inclusion, equity, you
Gotcha.
know, fully understanding what it means to be diverse, knowing and recognizing that diversity doesn't equal race,
Right.
but it can be a plethora of things. Let's not even get into intersectionality right now.
Yeah.
But I learned, over my career that I had to find these different ways to show different aspects of my own diversity.
Mhm.
And this happened in every place we went. And of course, every place meant a different culture, a different group of people that I had to kind of break the code
Right.
to figure out what that might look like for me in that setting.
Yeah, it's interesting that I don't know. I've started the podcast a couple months ago, and it seems like I found my tribe, because I relate so much to that, because I am also black, but I look mixed. So I'm a Cali girl. So when I lived in Southern California, most people just assumed I was mixed. And they were very surprised that both my parents are darker than I was. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just here. I don't have any control over what I look like. I'm
Right.
just here. And then when I moved to Florida, where I live now, I became Dominican. So everyone just assumes I'm Dominican until I tell them otherwise. And then when
Mm-hmm.
they see me showing up for black events, they're like, oh, I didn't know you were black. It's like, okay. I don't know why that mattered, but okay, sure, good to know.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those interesting things, because you don't want to make it the elephant in the room, but somehow it always becomes the elephant in the room. I'm not
Yeah.
always, but often it'll become the elephant in the room, of people looking and wondering, and do we accept her because she's mixed, or do we not accept her because she's mixed? And I felt, oddly, in California, I actually felt more on the outskirts of the black community,
Mm-hmm.
and not as accepted as I am here in Florida, even though I would consider California much more diverse. But
Mm-hmm.
getting engaged in the black communities always was a struggle to me. And I don't know what I did, or I don't know if it was something I gave off, or an impression I had, or what they're putting on me. And then I moved here, and I felt very at ease slipping into the black community. And I guess because the black community is a lot more robust, there
Mm-hmm.
are all of the shades in every region. And out there, I think it's more, if you are a lighter shade, you probably are not 100% black. And there's some kind of something. I don't know. I'm just speculating. I've done no
Yeah.
research on this. This is all personal experience. So it's it's interesting, because all the jobs I've had, it's always been kind of that elephant in the room. Like, is she a diverse hire or not? And how much of a diverse hire is she?
Hey.
And I had a friend at the law firm I used to work at, and she found out that for diversity, they had checked her box multiple times, to count
What do you
as,
mean?
because she was black, she was Native American, she was there was another, I can't remember, there was a third race that was non-white, and she was a woman. So when you put that on a report, it made it
Yeah.
seem like she was four
But
people
got it.
instead of
That's
one, because they counted her as black, they counted her as Native American, and they counted her as this other ethnicity. And so when that diversity report comes out, she counts, they're like, oh yeah, we're super diverse, and it's like, no, that's just really one person counted multiple times.
that's interesting.
So it was disappointing to find that out. And I think she was disappointed in the firm, because we felt the firm was pretty progressive.
Mm-hmm.
And overall, it did look more diverse than most firms did. But when you actually added up the numbers, because when they do the diversity report, they actually outline how many people out of how many people. And
Mm-hmm.
we were like, who are these people? Because we do not have
Right.
that many Black people and that many, Native Americans and that many. We just don't. So it was disappointing. And it just made you realize that your skin color counts for something. And sometimes that's very
Yeah.
disappointing.
Right. So what you're describing is actually a lot of the meat of my dissertation topic.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned, I'm studying business psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and my topic is all about women aspiring to executive roles, but women who are racially ambiguous.
Okay.
And the reason is, I feel like so back in the day, as a woman of color, it was so tough to advance in any field, really.
Yes.
We're talking about equity. So pay equity was off, all of these things, which there's still gaps. I'm not trying to say that's over. I mean, there's
Right.
still gaps. But suddenly, diversity is cool. And, you know, corporations, organizations are like, we got to get on this diversity train, So
Yes.
they
Yes.
they're trying to like highlight their corporate social responsibility by showing how diverse they are, and their brochures have I'm sure you've seen the iconic linking hands of all the different shades of
Yes, of
color, and
course. Of course.
and you click through websites and there's all the different shades, and
Yeah.
never mind that, again, I said that there's other kinds of diversity, like is a representation of ability, is a but
Yes.
that's, people tend to say, like when you said a diverse hire, people automatically equate diversity with race, and
Well, that
typically a
was
person of color.
just a side note. That's also what people equate when the argument is people of color, the POC. And
Yeah.
that's what their assumption is, oh, the person of color must be Black.
Yes, you're right.
And it's
You are
not.
right. Right.
So, yeah.
And that's exactly why I started to focus on racial ambiguity. Because, for example, I'll never forget that situation I told you about in the school I taught in Illinois,
Yeah.
when in that sense, I wasn't Black enough to represent the
Right.
Black community. Right? They had to
Mm-hmm.
pull in somebody else. My friend that left, she was visibly a Black American, so they were like, okay,
Yeah.
but then she left this vacancy, and I wasn't enough. And
Yes.
you discussed your feelings of fitting into the different communities in California versus Florida.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's the same for me. Like in Alaska, it didn't really matter because everybody up there is multiracial or indigenous, or there are military families that stayed. So there's like this, it's just almost people assume that you're going to be multiracial before they don't. And nobody
Right.
really asks you what, because like, why? Because they probably have a mixed ancestry too. So,
Right.
but when you go to a place like when I lived in Pittsburgh, in the community that I lived in, that was super homogenous, or when we left Illinois and we went to Italy, that's like you're either Italian or you're not, so it was an interesting experience too. But there's so many different ways to be a person of color. It's not just Black. So right, so that's why I decided to focus on this, because I thought we're trying to move beyond tokenism and not just have, quote, diverse hires,
Mm-hmm.
but what happens if you don't visibly look Black enough to represent what that company thinks, or if they are so, like, it's like a kind of an overcorrection, like we've got to, before we didn't have enough, now we've got to prove that we have people of color, i.e. Black people. So
Right.
they try, then what happens if you're not clear, if that box isn't, like I don't have boxes. I've got like, these kind of semicircle that's, I don't fit
Yeah.
neatly anywhere.
Right.
And I know there's other people like me. And so that's what I'm aiming to find out, what those experiences are like, particularly for women, you know, aspiring for those exec positions.
I just find it very interesting because, being in that, I would say a lot of times I fall into that role. There are some people who are like, yes, you're definitely Black. They don't ever have any questions. They don't even think about it. But there are other people who, I remember my first job, and not my first job, but one of my early jobs at a law firm. And I was this legal assistant, but it was just a 2-person office. So I was like the secretary, the paralegal, the legal assistant, everything. And I had an attorney, and he was white. And they knew his face because his face was, what was on the website and all that stuff. And I didn't care to be on the website, honestly. So it wasn't something I was looking for. So I would have conversations with people and be happy to talk to them and, advise them however I could on what they need to do. And then they would come into the office, and it was always the most heartbreaking thing. And it was the weirdest. It's hard to handle because their first reaction was, no, I'm here to speak to April. And I'm like, I am April. Oh, we just assumed you were white because I
Oh,
quote
David,
unquote
really?
sounded white to them.
Wow.
And that was a regular occurrence for our meetings. It was, I sounded white. So when I walked out, and for, like I said, a lot of people do find me racially uh, ambiguous. Got to pronounce the word correctly. Ambiguous.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. And they would just kind of look at me and do a double take and look and say, oh, and you could see them trying to backtrack without seeming like they're backtracking. And, oh yeah, we knew it was you. It was like, no, I just said I was April, and I just introduced myself, and then you acted like you were looking for someone else. And it's just heartbreaking when here's someone took me straight on my abilities, didn't care what I looked like. He had just hired me because I was good. And the clients have a different perspective of me. And the clients are like, oh, you did a race hire. Like, that's how they came across to him
God.
was, oh, you're helping this little Negro girl. It's just like,
Wow.
I mean, some of the
Incredible.
conversations he's had, because he would tell me, and those people he would not be excited to invite back to the office because he knew it made me uncomfortable. So he made sure he limited the amount of time they came in. Obviously, he couldn't fire them as clients because he needed to make money, but
Yeah.
he did understand how it was hurtful, and how some of his clients, I mean, some just brushed it off. It was that one statement and they were good, but some were, actually took that extra step to make mention to him about being, oh, why are you helping her? It's like, why does he have to be helping me? Like, I'm employed, I'm doing a job, and until you walked in and met me, you thought I was actually doing a great job. So, yeah, it's just one of those things in the corporate world that you're just in a very different arena, and it's sometimes very hard to navigate.
Fortunately, I haven't experienced that where someone, if they were shocked or surprised in any way, it wasn't vocalized. So I haven't experienced it that way. I do get the questions though, or even questions like, "Oh, how do you change your hair?" Oh, so
Oh, the hair.
yeah. So we lived in Berlin. We lived in Berlin for 4 years, and I taught at a German American school. And I sometimes would wear extensions. Sometimes I wore wigs. Sometimes my hair is naturally very, very, very curly. So sometimes I would wear, like, that's my summer hair typically is the curls, or whatever. I changed it sometimes a ponytail. So this one morning I was doing like how when kids come in, they're waiting before school and they're in the cafeteria or someplace they're waiting for their teachers. And one of the moms was like, "Miss Gann, oh my gosh, your hair's grown. How does your hair grow so fast?" And yes, I looked at her and said, "Oh, I have these magic beans." And I know I shouldn't have said that.
Man,
But
I
I
feel you
guess
on that one because I
I
just
just get over it's like, oh, I was just so, and I've been asked, I had another person in my community once that she was just so fascinated by how I would have different hair all the time. And I was like, we live in the world of YouTube. Like, look it up. Like, if you're so curious. And I
yeah.
know that's probably not the best attitude, but when you're confronted with it all the time, it,
It gets
I mean,
exhausting. It really
yeah,
does. That I mean, that's funny you said that because literally I got my hair cut recently, so it's about maybe three curly. It's like
mm,
3 or 4 inches long, and so I braided it up and put in faux locks.
yeah,
So if you had seen me yesterday and then you see me today, I look completely different because of the hair.
yeah,
And the faux locks are 22 inches down my back.
right.
And I used to have that same thing. I didn't used to wear, obviously faux locks are relatively new, but I used to get weaves and extensions, and um they would constantly say, "My God, your hair grew overnight." I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it did. And that was normally my reaction. I'd be like, yeah, it sure did. It grew overnight.
Yeah.
If that's what you believe, I can't really do anything about it. There are you and it's not even look at YouTube. Just look at television. You see
Well,
actors
that's,
play one role
yeah,
and they have short hair, and then in their very next role they have long hair. There's a way that happens. It's not in their head. Like, it's not, oh, they waited till their hair grew out. There's extensions, there's options, I mean, because obviously, we're kind of before the YouTube stage when we first started uh,
yeah,
doing all of this. So, I mean, it's just look around, just pay attention, but it makes it clear that you're getting extra attention because of things like that unnecessarily. It's unimportant,
right.
but
Well, I
somehow
mean,
it's a topic of
yeah. And
conversation.
I understand that it's curiosity. I get
Mhm.
that. And so that my answers aren't always sarcastic, but there are just some times where I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know about for you, but for me, hair is personal. And so my husband, who I mentioned, he's a white guy. He didn't grow up with black women dealing with hair. So
Yeah.
he's learned a lot too. And, people would like, if I did tell them, yes, I have extensions or I put in braids or whatever,
Mhm.
they always want to examine. I'm like, I am not letting you examine my hair. I was like, I don't say this, but I think of it like, I don't ask like about your underwear or something like that. Like, this is my personal, to me, someone going through my hair to see how it works is really an invasion. So
But it is.
I,
It's like you don't walk up to anyone and touch their hair. Like any of them, you would never turn around and say, "Hey, can I go through your hair and see how your hair works?"
right.
And the only time you would do that typically are pets. You do that with a pet. You go, "Oh, I
I
like
never,
the type of hair that pet has. Oh my gosh, it's so curly, it's so nice, it's so fine, it's so this, it's so that." And then you run your fingers through it. But you don't go up to people. If we were not black or having a different hair texture, they would never think of walking up to someone who has a similar hair texture of them and say, "Let me see how that works." They just
yeah.
wouldn't. And it's not just a lack of curiosity thing. It's just kind of a lack of respect of, you're not really human. You're just kind of here. At least that's how I feel. Like, you're just kind
Mhm.
of here. And if I want to do things like touch your hair, or, especially when you have kids, I don't know, do you have girls?
I have a boy and a girl.
Okay, so the girls get
Yeah.
a lot more attention for their hair, and with the different styling, with the, from a puff ball to a braid to cornrows to whatever. And it's like, because they're children, they don't even ask or anything. They just start walking up and putting their hands out, and as if that's acceptable practice for you to invade personal space. And
Mm.
really, that's what it is, invasion of personal space.
It is. It is. Well, I think the biggest wake up call and shock for me when I combining my change in career and my focus on DEI was when I lived in Prague. So I
Mhm.
most recently lived in Prague, And, at this point I am over 40 and
Yeah.
feeling there was like this weird sort of I'd started my new trajectory, started a new job that wasn't teaching, and everything seemed to come down at once. It was also the first year my son went to university.
Mm-hmm.
So like a little bit the start of empty nest kind of happening. My husband was about to really retire because he was going to retire right before, but then we did this other, we were like, okay, we're going to do one more. So that's why we went to Prague. So then it was like, okay, oh my God, everything is changing at once. Like
Yeah.
everything was changing at once. And I had kind of a freak out moment, like almost like going through adolescence again. Like, who am I?
Mm.
What am I going to do? How am am I sure I can do this? I started to doubt myself. Like, why did I change my career? Can I do this? Can I run with these people that have done it already for the last, 15, 16, however many years?
Yes.
And then came, like, I would say a year or so after that, almost like a sense of empowerment, like, I got this. I mean, not that everyone has their sort of moments of doubt, and you go through this sort of imposter syndrome time,
Yes.
but I felt so good. Like it took me a minute to realize that it was the right choice, for me. It was the
Yes.
right fit. So, I mean, that was pretty exciting, but I had to go through all of this other stuff. And that included sort of, because talk about homogenous Prague, the city of Prague, or the country, the Czech Republic.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get, I mean, it was pretty white. I mean, it's just the nature of
Yes.
things. It's a
Yeah.
landlocked country. They don't get a lot of, immigration and stuff like that. Most of the people of color that you see are tourists coming in. And
Right.
so living there was kind of a tough period for me because I did not look like my neighbors or anything else, and I didn't really speak Czech that well, and I was also going through this huge transformation.
Mm.
So, but coming out of there, I mean, it was. I'm still going on the journey. Does the journey end? It doesn't really.
No,
So
it
you keep
doesn't.
learning, you keep growing, but yeah, that was, I think, the most tumultuous period, um, sort of that transition.
What can you explain a little bit of the, I guess, experience that you had in Prague being not homogenous, not part of a homogenous community?
Sure. I almost wanted to do sort of a social experiment, actually. And
Okay.
I know I go back to the hair a lot. I'm sorry, but it's a big part of my identity.
Yeah.
And I realized, so if I wear, like, I know your listeners can't see, but I've straightened my hair today. So if my hair is straight and it's summertime and everyone's a little bit sun kissed, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
um, it was like nothing. I mean, the culture there is not the most warm and open as could be compared to other places anyway. So
Right.
if you get a friendly "Dobrý den," like that's a big deal. Like they said hello to me.
Yes.
But if I had my hair, if I wore my hair in its natural state, very curly, like no smile, no greeting, and lots of staring. And
Mm.
public transport is just kind of what you do in Europe.
Yes.
So I
Much more
commuted,
efficient
but
than in the US.
so much more. So I can recall being on the bus, like with my daughter, and people would stare at me openly, and my kids just look like monoracially white kids. So she would be infuriated and kind of block. She would stand in front of me to block their vision of me, and I'd be saying, "It's okay, they're just checking me out. They're curious." But as much as I loved the people there, like my colleagues and my friends, there were quite a few people there that are openly racist and xenophobic. And so some of those stares could be out of curiosity and some could just be like, you don't belong. So it did make
Mm.
me feel very uncomfortable. Um, but it all depended on how I left my house that day. It is to
Wow.
how I was treated. Um, Stairs, like I would go into like a cosmetic store and be followed, and like that didn't happen to me in Italy. It
Right.
didn't happen to me in Germany. We lived in Berlin, which is also a very, very diverse city. It's so international. So, again, a little bit like Anchorage, even though Berlin has the history it has, like these days, it's so international and welcoming. And like people just didn't treat me like that. So I had to kind of, like, it was a bit jarring.
I would imagine.
I'm there. Yeah.
Wow. So tell us a little bit more about, so you have a podcast. How long has it been going on? Our True Colors. It's Our True Colors, correct?
It is. It was originally called Tribe and True, actually.
Okay.
So you'll have to listen to the season 2 episode called "What's in a Name" to find out about that change in the name.
Okay.
But yes, it's Our True Colors. It's a weekly podcast. I started publishing November 2019,
Okay.
and about to wrap up the second season, getting ready to go into the third. And it's really a focus on sense of belonging. When you are a person who doesn't, as I described earlier, neatly fit into one particular category, at least in the way that others perceive you. Um,
Right.
so I wanted to have a platform for people who could feel a sense of community and feel like they do belong, and then also express their experiences that they go through as a racially ambiguous person.
Nice. So from there, where do you see yourself with the new PhD? Do you know exactly what you want to do with that? Are you going to dive in a little deeper with, and I keep doing this, giving compound questions as if I'm like, let me just throw out everything that I can think of right now. I guess let's start with what are you going to do, or what is your plan so far with your PhD that you're attaining?
Well, right now, I don't specifically have any intentions of going back to teach at the university level, although I could with the PhD. What I'd like to do is become an expert in my field. So the reason my dissertation topic is what it is because I was originally, it's really interesting in light of what's happening right now. Actually, I did a
Mm-hmm.
project about a social issue, and it was just when the Take a Knee movement was starting with
Mm-hmm.
Kaepernick. And through that, I learned about the Rooney Rule, which was in football, there were no black head coaches. And Rooney decided that there needed to be at least one black candidate interviewed for a head coach position. So that, because it was kind of like this whole like buddy system. Oh, my
Right.
friend would be a good coach, just the kind
Mm-hmm.
of, how it goes, right? The social promotion, let's say.
Yes.
And so in order to diversify in football, that's the Rooney Rule, which led me to, head coach. Well, what about the heads of corporations? Because I'm doing business psych, right? So
Right.
that's when I learned that Ursula Burns was the last black CEO female in a Fortune 500 company, and she left the company in 2009. So, like, when you ask, I would ask
Yeah.
people, like, how many black women do you think are CEOs of Fortune 5 companies? People will say things like 15, 3, and I'm like, zero,
I
zero.
I feel like I saw an article not too long ago that had black female CEOs, but maybe it was that long ago.
Or if it's Fortune 500,
Oh,
because there are
that's
black
true.
CEOs, but it's the
That's
Fortune
true.
5. And then in that, there are women of color, but there's like Asian women and Latina women. There's a
Right.
lot of females, but so that kind of got me interested. And then I realized there's tons of literature about the gender gap and the fact that there aren't black women in leadership like there should be. But I couldn't find anything for someone like me who isn't
Mm-hmm.
quote black enough,
Right.
as I explained from my previous experiences with my own work,
Mm-hmm.
like what happened with me at work. And so there's so little. So that's why I kind of got into that. And I think there's a need for that expertise because our demographics in America are changing. I
You
don't
are.
identify as multiracial or biracial. I mean, I do identify as multiracial because my family's Black, but then I've got Creole, but it's not what
Right.
people think of when they think of a mixed person or something like that. But we're changing, you know.
Yeah.
Millennial generation is the largest generation.
Mm-hmm.
And among them, it's the largest group of racially diverse folks, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
them multiracial. This is who's going to be our leadership. This is who's going to be, running our businesses. And so for me, I took a very big interest in that. And so that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to be able to share expertise.
Well, on that, to piggyback on that point a little bit, is a lot of people I know are in interracial marriages as well.
Mhm.
So, not only is this generation changing, but their children they are already interracial, and then they're having interracial children on top of it. So
Mhm.
now we are compounding the interracial intersect of, life. And it's just so, and I think that's what's so heartbreaking about what's going on and these fights over race. And, if you're listening to this podcast at a later time, this week, Minneapolis police officer, um, I'll say, murdered a civilian over a supposed bad check, with putting his knee into the back of his throat until he couldn't breathe and he died. And I'm watching people say, well, it's not race related. And the question is, when's the last time you've seen a cop put their knee in the back of a white man's throat to the point that he died? And I'm not going to say don't put it, because obviously it's part of the training to put a knee
Uh,
in the back of the throat, which I think is
no, it
insane.
isn't.
It isn't? I don't know, because that
No,
didn't seem to
there
get a lot
are
of
no,
lot of issues.
there are restraints. There are neck restraints. There are certain restraints, but they're only allowed to exert as much force as necessary to stop whatever
Is
is
happening.
happening. And in the
Right.
case with this gentleman, he was not resisting. He
No,
was handcuffed on the ground.
on the ground with the cop's
And the
hands in his
guy,
pocket.
there's no force because he was able to have his hand in his pocket.
Right. So,
Right.
but the conversations kept going back to, you can't separate race from this issue. I know you want to. I know it's a big problem because it is also a cop hurting a human, which also,
Mhm.
that you have to see us as human. You have to see
Right.
Black people as human first before because you would never do that to someone. And I liken it to, um, if that was his friend's son,
Mhm.
would it ever have gotten to that point? Would it? Even if he was resisting arrest, even if he was doing everything. I've seen countless videos of white men getting in police officers' faces, yelling at them, cussing at them, throwing things at them. And normally they, for the most part, just kind of stand around and wait until the person calms down and then moves in when the person tires themselves out. Whereas
Right.
it's act first and then figure out what's going on with Blacks, unfortunately. And so you can't remove Black from the argument because you're not seeing it happen to other people. You're just not. You
Yeah.
see it other people who are non-white. You don't see it happening to white people. So it's
Right.
hard to not add race as a very necessary component to the discussion.
Agreed.
So,
And the thing is, I really had I had a tough time processing this because there's a lot that's happened at once. Back in February, you've got the situation with Ahmaud Arbery down in Georgia,
yeah,
and we didn't even know about it until the video was released recently, and only
yeah,
then was there any action.
yeah,
Compounded by this situation with George Floyd, compounded by in the very same week the story circulating about Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper in Central Park, the
yeah,
woman who weaponized her whiteness because she didn't like that she was being asked to follow a rule. And she knew exactly what she was doing when she threatened to call the police and say, I'm going to tell the police that an African American man is threatening my life.
Right.
and clearly he wasn't. And I posted, I don't usually post that much on social media, I'm just going to tell you, but I was so moved by the post that Bernice King, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., she posted this picture with side by side with Kaepernick and with the policeman on with his knee on or on George Floyd, and said, if the picture with Kaepernick enrages you, but the picture of George Floyd just kind of mildly bothers you, then you are a person that's more interested in order than justice.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful to me that I posted this. And I have a very good friend. She's a white woman. We come from different communities, but we are good friends. And she
Right.
said, I'm opposed to both. And I said, I'm not at all opposed to a person taking a knee to protest the needless taking of lives. Okay. Like, I just am not. And it just shook me. And I had to go, we had this whole conversation where she said, I just want peace and I pray for everybody. And I'm like, okay, but people of color have been praying for generations. What we really need is
Yeah.
allies. This is a time where we know what the problem is. And when I see things like, we're going through the whole COVID trial and tribulation right now as a country, and
Yes.
they say, African Americans are affected more than anybody else, and we've got to look into this. And I'm screaming at the television set, look into it. We know what the disparities are. We know what the problem is, and so do you.
Right.
And it's just right. So this is a very tumultuous. It's just so
It's
hard.
this week. I mean, I'm not saying the previous deaths, the Trayvon Martins, from years ago didn't have an impact, but for some reason, I don't know if it's because we're home with COVID and
Mm-hmm.
I am doing so much more online than I normally do. I didn't do much on social media before, kind of scroll, look, and then turn it off. But it just seems so heartbreaking because people you like, or you thought you liked, or you thought they agreed with you, have such apathy towards the deaths of these people, or saying things like, well, if he'd only complied, Ahmaud Arbery, if he only complied. It boggles my mind to say that. I was like, I missed that memo or rule or law where we're supposed to comply with basically random people coming up to you and telling you to do things. I didn't know we had
Right.
to do that. I don't remember any place that we've ever learned that if a stranger walks up to you and starts telling you to do something, it is your responsibility to comply. And if you don't, death is acceptable. Death is an
Right.
acceptable outcome. That that boggles my mind. And the fact that there are people out there, and they are not Facebook friends anymore. And some of them were actual friends. And I was like, I can't be in this discussion with you because you want to say that there's all these things that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to comply. We're supposed to do this. We're supposed to do that. Except for even when we do it, we die. Even when we do
Yeah.
it, we get shot. Even when we're just minding our own business, walking down the street, random people can come up to us and nothing happens. And so when the cops got fired for George Floyd, I um posted one small step towards justice, and people were like, well, they should be arrested. I was like, of course they should be arrested. The problem is they normally don't even get fired. We are
Right.
lucky if they're even reprimanded. They normally get put on administrative leave until it kind of blows over, and then they go back to work. And they're the same cops that are patrolling the area. And we're supposed to just be like, oh, it's okay. I'm like, well, at least they don't have a job and they can't keep doing this to other people. In the meantime, supposedly they need to investigate. I don't know what they need to investigate, but whatever. But at least they're not harming other people in the meantime. At least they're not
Yeah.
going out there and torturing or allowing other people to torture other civilians because they're in a mood that day because they just felt like it. They want to wield their police power over an
Right.
individual. So sorry, I got very into I'm telling
That's
you,
okay.
like,
I get passionate too, and it's been a tough one. I
yes,
guess the thing that I said to kind of illustrate this is all of these things have always happened.
yes,
They're always happening. The
yes.
only thing that's changed is we live in a time with tech that's ready to go, and people will, if it weren't for video, like the phones, where people
Hmm.
actually document what's going on. I mean, how much more do we not see? Imagine with Ahmaud
Oh,
Arbery, it happened months ago.
yeah,
I guess that's the difference. It's like, no, no, no. See, it's not that suddenly things are getting bad.
right.
It's just suddenly you're seeing it. It's highlighted.
Yeah, you are
That's
made
helpful.
aware of it, and now you have to address it because now
Yeah.
you see that all of the complaints that people have been saying are real and they're actual. And another kind of side discussion I had with a friend yesterday. So a friend of mine posted this whole list of things when he's been pulled over by the cops, and being not never being arrested, never actually
But getting
getting charged,
yeah.
but he got pulled over. He's called out his name. He's asked to get out of his car. He's asking how much he had to smoke that night, how much he had to drink that night. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't drink. They don't smell it in the car, but that's the question that's coming out of their mouth. They ultimately don't even give him a ticket, so they know there was nothing wrong with it in the first place. And my point was, all of us, and I will say all of us, get pulled over for nonsense tickets. Unfortunately, cops have quotas. They like pulling people over, but not all of us are treated poorly when that happens.
Mhm.
Not all of us get pulled out of our car while our car gets searched because they need a traffic ticket. Not all of us do that. Who often are the victims of that? Black male. That's just it.
Yeah.
Black men get pulled out of their car. They're not doing anything wrong. And when they are trying to meet their quota for that, it's harassment. It's get out of your car. I need to search you. Put your hands on the vehicle. Lay down on the ground. Calling names. All sorts of things. And that's what people don't understand, because when they say we get pulled over, they just say, oh, well, I get pulled over too. I get, and it's like, yeah, but your interaction is pretty friendly. They say whatever, you may cry, you may have a story, and then they just let you go. But even the ones that get let go are still harassed before they do. It's a harassed action. So I don't know, it's just coming to a head for, for
Yeah,
me.
I think it's coming
And
to a head for America.
yeah, and and
Yeah.
so we were talking yesterday, I guess it was trending yesterday, Boston Tea Party, because they were getting upset about
Talking
Minneapolis
about
burning
rioting.
down and the rioting, and not realizing really this country is built on violence. This entire country, I know they want to act and walk around and be naive about our history, but we are violent towards the people. America, the structure of America is violent towards its citizens, and it always has been. People who belong and people who don't belong. From the Native Americans to Boston Tea Party, so that's two different ones. The Native Americans were the others, but the Boston Tea Party were the same. They were the same, community. But now I'm like, they're still violent towards Black communities. It's just put in a prettier bow. When
Mhm.
you institute something like eminent domain, where you can just come in and buy property of a neighborhood and tear it apart, that's violent. It's violent to just lose your home just because. Like, not because you didn't pay the bills, not because you didn't do something right, but the government decided this area is an area they want to improve. And to improve it, they need to kick you out. So they get to take your home, give you very little on the dollar, which means you don't have money to move someplace else. So even if you owned your home, you don't have enough money to own another home, and you're displaced. And now all of a sudden you're the problem because you're displaced and you don't have any place to go. And how come you don't work harder is, the societal's response. How come you don't work harder? I was like, I didn't know your house just got taken from you
Right.
and you had to restart your life. basically for doing absolutely nothing wrong. And this is a continual pattern that happens. And I think now white people can't hide in the sand anymore. They're trying to. There's still some people who are really desperately trying to pretend that this isn't happening. And they're, that slavery, because, it's always, well, slavery happened, generation ago. I didn't have anything to do with it. So this became much more political than I was anticipating. Even though it was racially a racial, you're going to the racial equity. I don't know. It just gets me all up in arms. As you see, I get very passionate about it because I watch them burn down a city and I feel for them. I feel because it's comes out of a feeling of hopelessness because they can't, there's nothing, no one's doing anything about it. The best you can hope for is a firing. Like that's where we're at, is someone loses their job because they can get another job. It just means.
Right. And then they continue with whatever behavior. And I was hearing a commentator say, these acts, it's like not everybody has a platform.
Right.
So how do you get your point across? There's only so much you can scream or shout or whatever. And I don't want to see the destruction and the looting either.
No, I don't.
It's horrible for lots of reasons. And one of those reasons is the very community that we need as allies then looks down further, right?
Right.
But at the same time, one has to be able to understand when you back someone in a corner, they're going to fight. And you've got to survive and you've got to have a voice. And if you don't provide a platform, then damn it, I'm going to build my platform.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it is frustrating. And it is, and you're right. I am passionate about it too. And it has been particularly heavy on me with George Floyd. So.
Yeah. And we were looking, I was like, we're all talking about fear, and it's fear in different ways. So the same way you can justify a cop killing someone for fear that someone may have a gun, you can't be upset that someone is willing to loot out of fear that they're going to lose their life. And I know it's not a direct comparison, but granted, if you are just afraid that someone's going to have a gun and you kill them for it, that's not rational. That's not a rational response to a fear that someone has a gun, because first of all, you don't know that they have a gun. Second, you don't know if they're even going to use the gun, and they haven't pulled the gun on you. So the idea that it's acceptable that, oh, well, he was afraid that he might have a gun is an excuse is no more rational than anything else that's happening. And you can't make the argument that it's acceptable to kill someone, is what I'm saying. It's acceptable to kill someone out of fear, but now we don't have a platform and we enraged, and it's like, well, that's not the way it should be done. It's like, no, that's not the way it should be done.
But there's no fear, and it's okay to storm the Capitol there in Michigan when you don't want to wear a mask. So you show up with your automatic weapons and you shout in the faces of the police there.
Again, shouting in the faces of police, no arrest made. Everyone just stands by and watches it all happen.
Right. That's okay. That's exercising your First Amendment rights.
Right.
And your second right, we're allowed to bear arms.
Yeah.
But imagine if that were a different group of men showing
would
up.
Never have allowed. As soon as there was more than 20 of them, it would have been shut down. Where's your permit? You guys need to have a permit to form. And why are you here? You need to go home. And don't let one of them yell in the cop's face.
Right.
But we saw even because I believe the Minneapolis one actually started as a peaceful protest, and they came with tear gas with it. No guns, nothing, no guns. They came with tear gas ready to hurt people.
Yeah.
So, it's unfortunate. It's hard to watch it's hard to watch because, those are, all of them are, our sisters and brothers. I'm I do obviously relate to being Black, but I still have respect for people who are also respectful, and their communities are getting torn apart as well, and their neighborhoods are being affected by this. On the other hand, maybe this is a time for them to be true allies and help join in the fight instead of being an onlooker on the side, and realize that this is more than just a few people complaining and being overly sensitive,
Right.
because that's typically what we get. We're overly
It's
sensitive, and
the result of a system that's
it's a result of a
been messed
system.
up for a long time.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, where can we find you online? With that, we'll end. Where can we find you online?
Well, my podcast is listed on most major platforms, so Apple Podcasts, Google, etc. And my webpage is truecolorscast.com. And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram as well. Instagram is our True Colors podcast. So, yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It's
Yeah.
a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise. Yes, indeed.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Other Side of 40. You can find us at our site, theothersideof40.com, and on Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Other Side 40.